Welcome everybody to week 48 of 2025. This is the Build Weekly Roundup. As always, you have myself, Cameron Otsuka, and Matt Dines here to talk through our top three topics of the week. I wanted to start us off with everybody happy Thanksgiving. I know I spent some time with my wife, had a nice night in. Matt, sounds like you had a good time with your family as well. So always thankful to have the time to be able to spend with family, friends, and all of that. So again, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Moving into our topics for the week, though, number one, I think this one really went under the radar. I know I saw an initial news headline on the ESLR final rules directly from, I believe it was the OCC, but I haven't really seen too much written about it in Bloomberg or in other, major news outlets. So I'm really interested for Matt to kind of walk us through what he sees in this ESLR update and final ruling. Secondarily, the Genesis mission. For those who do not know, the White House just published the launch in quotes of the Genesis mission, and we'll get into what that means, what that might entail, and then finally, just kind of updating on where we're at in terms of the Russia-Ukraine peace deal potential. A lot of kind of moving parts as always, but we're starting to see some movement potentially towards, Matt has put here some runners crossing the finish line. So hopefully we see that as well. So Matt, did you want to kind of start us off with anything, any Thanksgiving wishes before we dive right into the topics for the week?
Yep, just making sure everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. Hope everybody got to see family, spend time with friends, and just to express gratitude for everything to be thankful for. I know these crazy times, everybody's under stress, a lot of stuff up in the air, but it's my favorite holiday, at least one of them. I'd put 4th of July up there as well for patriotic reasons, obviously, but there's nothing like Thanksgiving. So yeah, hopefully everybody spent it in gratitude and had a great meal with the ones they love. I think the topics this week, Cameron, you mentioned the ESLR reduction. We'll just get right into that. But I think from my take on this, it was a long time coming. This one's been hinted at for, I mean, well over 18 months. We knew this was eventually going to be realized at some point. It's just a matter of when that date finally hit right now. So timing is everything, right? In music, comedy, etc. I think this comes at a very important moment for what's going on in the global monetary system, the dollar, the public debt, etc. So we'll get into that and explain why this matters. Um, why don't we just start there? I think, yeah, a lot of the headlines you're seeing, two National Guardsmen killed in Washington, D.C., just local unrest kind of popping up throughout the United States. Those are the stories that are grabbing the headline attention this week. But under the surface, hopefully we'll identify the key things going on and what to watch for to help everybody get their bearings. So the ESLR reduction, what does it actually mean? So in the post-global financial crisis world, we've had the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank for central banks that really operates as the trusted third party counterparty, man in the middle for international trade, just processing cross-border transactions. They all run through the BIS, which is domiciled in Switzerland. It's a private foreign bank as well, important to keep in consideration. The GSIB rules were basically kind of passed down as part of the new regulatory frameworks, and basically there's this rule or this kind of agreement that's been placed to comply with Basel III and other post GFC regulation, meant to ensure that we don't have another 2008 financial crisis. Um, Required the GSIBs to hold um, a, a significant amount of capital behind their loans or their credit origination. So if you think about a bank's balance sheet, this is where the money creation actually takes place inside the commercial banking system. When a bank originates a loan or funds a debt security like a US Treasury, they had to hold some equity capital against it. And what the ESLR, the enhanced SLR, requirement was, it was basically an extra surcharge on top of the GSIBs, globally systemically important banks, replace the what was the old acronym, SciFi or something, systemically important financial institution, just a new four-letter acronym. But basically, like you can think about it as like a G7, G8 country, um, kind of has its qualifying, large commercial banks that have to comply with these rules in order to be in the good graces of this key middleman who operates as like a key hub and spoke in uh, the cross-border financial transactions, right? So what the E in enhanced SLR is an extra surcharge that your GSIBs had to hold in reserve in terms of equity against um, just new credit creation, right? So for US GSIBs prior to Tuesday's announcement, where we had Michelle Bowman from the Fed announce the ESLR was being ratcheted down from 3% extra capital surcharge down to 1%. That's on top of the like a 3% tier one equity requirement. That's just that operates pretty much across the board for the SLR part, the supplementary leverage ratio. And what the E was that extra 3% is effectively lowered to 1, so that now if one of our GSIBs, and I think the US has 5 of them, it's your JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Citibank, et cetera, your largest, it's what we all kind of categorized as too big to fail institutions, right, after 2008. Now, when they buy, say, a treasury and fund the government or the public deficits, right, and that increase in national debt, now instead of holding $6 in capital behind that say $100 of credit created or extended to the federal government, now they only need $4. So in effect, it's a 2-point reduction on six, so it's a 33% reduction and the amount of capital required to fund that, that same equivalent $100 of treasury debt. Now, in terms of capacity in the system, like where the rubber meets the road, what the important thing is, once we lower this from 3 to 1, what it frees up is bank balance sheet capacity, like of our big five GSIBs. So what this allows them to do is fund more of the Treasury debt issuance inside of the domestic U.S. financial system. And what that means is for the same, public deficit curve, like just take that as given for what it is, right? We have the CBO models. We've been through this process, big, beautiful bill, all of that. All of that deficit spending is essentially planned for. What this actually impacts is what percentage or what share of those dollar IOUs are going to be funded by the onshore banking system, which the US government and public sector has regulation over, and which portion is going to go cross-border or offshore, right? So this plays into the broader story you've heard Cameron and I talk about over the last 52 weeks of 2025 and beyond of what's going on in the global dollar system itself, the reining in of the offshore dollar and kind of harnessing that in and putting more domestic coverage on top of the dollar itself, or the domestic system's role in regulating the dollar in terms of international trade, credit expansion, all of the above. So if you get into like nominal values, what does this actually mean? You've got a couple of estimates here in terms of what this would do to the theoretical purchasing capacity of the U.S. domestic banking system's ability to show up at these treasury auctions, weekly, monthly, et cetera, and take down more of the U.S. Treasury debt issuance. Two banks here, ING, this is a Dutch bank, so both of these are offshore. ING estimates that buying capacity after this ESLR reduction to be 4 trillion, and BNP Paribas, French bank, we've talked about them in prior episodes, certain things they've been involved in. Go back, look at, I think it was 3 weeks ago, we talked about the Sudan, Darfur court ruling. That was particularly notable to BNP Paribas. But they estimate in a research report, they put out the number 6 trillion. What this would amount to in terms of incremental excess capital would be $200 billion, so 0.2 trillion. So if you put that to an annualized amount in terms of budget deficits, right? This is percent of GDP. Key thing here is the flatlining of that share of deficits to GDP that we saw with One Big Beautiful Bill, et cetera, in terms of the CBO's planning. The goal is to stabilize that and then to fund more of that that debt issuance domestically. This doesn't solve the problem itself. It does nothing to slow down the public debt growth nominally, right? We just cracked 37 trillion. That number is just going to keep going up for the status quo, short-term, medium-term time frame, right? Those are locked in. It's all what we're working towards is putting a ceiling in terms of those blowout deficits and then funding them domestically. And this comes down to, at the end of the day, which banking system basically has control over the debt IOUs, which ultimately works its way in control of global dollars exchange rate, yield curves, and credit creation itself. So
And just to
all
jump
of,
in here, Matt, so
yeah,
just to make sure I'm following you here, what you're talking about is so on this chart here, total deficit, you're basically saying the goal here is, disregard the light purple versus darker purple for this for now. We're looking at what percentage of that total deficit is attributed then to domestic banks versus offshore banks, and we want to try
yeah,
to tilt that scale more towards the domestic banks. Is that
that
correct?
that's correct, right? So
Got it.
as we're this debt problem is just going to keep bleeding out. Like everybody who thinks we're going to solve this deficit spending problem through some act of Congress, it won't resolve that way. Like we can't rein in spending to control this thing.
Yep.
The fact of the matter is the deficits are going to happen regardless. It's baked into the monetary structure. It has to take place. What we can change is the structural flows. So that's what you see going on with this example this week. Where are the IOUs going to flow? Well, the ESLR reduction on net, all else equal, tilts the playing field from those dollar IOUs and the financial deficits working their way offshore, right? So you get this dollar bleeding
I see.
from the domestic US economy to offshore. And if you think about the other tactical policy approaches that have put in place this year, tariffs are another example of a force working towards the same direction of like compartmentalizing the dollar flows, so you don't have that onshore to offshore leakage that's been taking place for at least 50 years, but really it's the post World War II systemic structuring.
Right.
Um, so with the tariffs, instead of, I mean, the world or the U.S. just bleeding dollars to the world, and you have this buildup of the offshore dollar. With the tariffs, what you have is policy implementation through the international trade channels directly. You put a tariff on the importer. Let's say a good costs $100, right? Everybody going Black Friday shopping today at let's say Costco. You go buy a pair of headphones that cost $100. Prior to the tariffs, the government was taking no charge. The importer would take its price markup, um, and ultimately, say the consumer is passing or is willing to pay 100, the manufacturer or the exporter, based in Southeast Asia may get 50, right? And everybody's got to take their cut through the system. Once you have tariffs, and then those dollars, the headphones come in to the U.S. wind up in the consumer's house. They're walking around with the AirPods in, everything. Everybody's doing it. Those dollars flow externally, right? They go from a U.S. bank, and then the ledger transactions they work their way offshore to, say, a bank in Hong Kong, right? And then it shows up in the Hong Kong dollar, a dollar peg currency. What you get with a tariff now is an extra charge. Let's say it's 100% tariff. Let's say the importer is paying $50 to the manufacturer. Well, the government is now going to take $50, right, to keep it simple. And so, in effect, what happens, the U.S. consumer, this is why we're not seeing blowout inflation on the tariffs. And you saw a Fed research report come out, and I didn't link to this, but it says the tariffs are not inflationary, right? It's research opinion, right? But this gets into it. The consumer of the headphones, right? Let's say your headphone price went up to $200, right? Some of us may be able to absorb that in our budget. We'll have to spend an extra $100 to get our headphones. I know AirPods cost more than that, but let's just be
easier for me, please.
Keep it simple. Yeah. But not everybody can, right? Not everybody's wages go up by that incremental 100. So on net, that's why you don't see the prices of AirPods and everything else imported just blowing out. It's because the American consumer can't afford it. And if the consumption isn't there, there's no export base, and then the production just builds up an inventory, and you got to find a new market to export into, right? So it's tough to find. So what we're seeing is, all right, the U.S. government is going to take the 100% tariff. That what it actually nets out to is the exporter, let's say Southeast Asian in this case, your AirPods are manufactured in Vietnam, they'll get fewer dollars, right? So they're showing up. They're still willing to export into the U.S. consumption market, but on net, what this amounts to is fewer dollars leaving the onshore system. So it's all part of that story I've been talking about. SOFR replacing LIBOR, U.S. Domestic financial system taking control of overnight interest rates and short-term dollar liquidity funding markets. Same thing with tariffs. This is the same thing with the ESLR. Now we're saying, all right, now we're going to be sending fewer treasuries offshore to fund this. And so I'll come back with this. I need to go refresh on Gordon Pepper's money, credit, and asset prices. But what this is actually going to do, or expected to do, if you take that framework, I need to go back, brush up on this, and read it with a new lens. How would this policy map to the Gordon Pepper framework? But what it would be expected to result in, based on my quick assessment this week, you would have the domestic financial position of the U.S. financial system, which you would base it on public debt, less foreign or borrowing from foreign entities. This policy should start kicking that up, so that rises. That domestic financial position of the banks in terms of the public debt standpoint is equivalent, it's an accounting identity to the net deposits in the system, or in the domestic U.S. financial system, which would be deposits themselves, time deposits included, held at U.S. bank or U.S. banks, less loans, right? So if the U.S. Domestic financial position, that rise in public debt holdings, essentially monetized through the domestic commercial banking system, increases, you have to see net deposits, like deposits minus loans, come up with that as well. And what that would lead to under this framework, what you would expect is balance sheet expansion within the U.S. banking system, which means more credit, more lending. Is how this would work itself out. And then because this policy is like putting the containers, like just hermetically sealing that border, where the U.S. sovereign jurisdiction ends, the 50 states and its held and its territories and possessions, you contain that dollar liquidity inside of the U.S. itself, and that doesn't leak offshore. And this is what we saw with prior iterations of stimulus, right? The 2020, trillions of QE plus trillions of fiscal spending with CARES Act, American Recovery Act, CHIPS Act, et cetera. A lot of that dollar credit creation on the public side ultimately just wound up leaking right into the offshore
Because you're
system.
buying
So
those products
so
from offshore, you're investing over there. Yeah.
yep. So this is what's happening in terms of policy. It's very clear at this point what the U.S. Treasury, the Fed, you could even say the Trump with the tariffs themselves. It's all working in coordination towards this objective of ultimately putting up a barrier between the onshore offshore dollar. Um, this is what we're living through play out. So very interesting things. I'll brush up. I'll read through. I know we're on vacation now. I'm probably not going to do it here, but maybe between Christmas and New Year's, I'll do another reread of Gordon Pepper's Money, Credit, and Asset Prices because there are implications. He does deal with this from a UK perspective and the pound sterling, what it went through in the post-war, post-World War II environment of its own banking system. I'm gonna read that, brush up, and hopefully give you the audience a better crystal ball, if you will, of what to expect from this as the U.S. continues to build out and reinforce this process we're talking about.
And Matt did do, if you want to search through our prior archives, Matt has done an overview of this as well previously. So highly recommend that
Yeah,
before he maps that onto what's going on today.
yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of
We
continue
we
here.
we
Yeah, go for
talked
it.
about it in previous episodes about what it means for public debt markets itself, but there's an additional kind of body to the whole framework on what happens or what are the implications of public deficits being funded and financed through commercial bank balance sheets themselves. And that's clearly the policy we're working towards. Um, I would say the net effect, I would expect it to be inflationary over the longer term. Inflationary in its truest definition of commercial banking balance sheet expansion. So continue to watch. We'll give an update within the next few months, but hopefully we'll have something richer to add on that topic. Now, something kind of beating this horse to death, but what does this actually net out to in terms of the balance sheet composition of the U.S. commercial banks themselves, in terms of Treasury holdings? And then the other thing that's important is the top line expansion. Under a fiat credit monetary model, right? You really get GDP growth through balance sheet expansion in your financial system, right? So this is the whole crux of the matter. What you can't have is actually balance sheet contraction. That's a very bad thing for these structures and monetary systems. And what you're looking at with the ESLR reduction would be more treasuries on the commercial bank balance sheet. So I've got that on the top half of this chart here. In red is the U.S. Treasury and agency debt holdings. So it's, when we say agency, it's a government-sponsored enterprise, not including any mortgage-backed securities or any Fannie Freddie real estate lending, any of that. This is just purely Treasury lending, and then you can also include, say a lending or debt directly to a government agency itself. So an arm of the federal government. The reason I have that included here is just because the Fed's H.8 report doesn't break those two things out. You just get the whole thing together. So right now, the U.S. owns 1.9, almost 2 trillion of the federal government debt or its related arms of GSEs. That's on a total balance sheet of about $21 trillion. That itself is a little bit less than nominal GDP, which is about $27 trillion at that last check. So What this would do, this ESLR policy, it allows your five GSIBs to own more treasuries. When you increase that bottom number, this is just stroke of the pen, right? Banks can buy zero point 0.2 trillion more treasuries just overnight, let's say. That's going to work its way into the system in the very short term. Your top line of credit in the banking system will also expand with it, right? So your total assets in the banking system goes up as well. That should, create more credit creation, more money supply, right? That's the M2 growth. If you look at the bottom, what are the ratios of these two things? Since about 2020, we've seen, it's clearly an uptrend since at least 2014. For the U.S. banking system as a whole, the composition of these federal government, debt assets held on commercial bank balance sheets, it's risen from about, let's say, a 6% level. It crossed over in 2020, and that number continues to tick up. You see the trend on the chart in terms of the share of the bank's balance sheet that is funding treasuries. It's up to 9.3% right now. And this is where the ESLR doesn't do anything in terms of tilting the playing field towards lower capital requirements for GSIBs for the Treasury debt itself. They're still not quite apples to apples themselves, right? A U.S. Treasury asset is considered lower in the context of the system itself compared to other credit lending. This doesn't do anything to address that gap, but what it does do is just increase those top lines directly, so you can get more balance sheet expansion, more money creation in the domestic financial system itself. The other thing I'd raise here, so Bloomberg doesn't have a good series on this where it splits out the large commercial banks. So it's the top end. You have to cross over a certain balance sheet size to make it into that group. But the large commercial banks actually hold a greater share of their balance sheet in U.S. Treasury and its agency debt by a significant margin versus the regional banks and smaller. So, right here we show the 9.3%. That is heavily skewed towards your GSIBs. Your large commercial banks, based on the H8 reports breakout, they're holding 10.9% of their balance sheets in this line item, the Treasury and agency debt, non-mortgage backed securities. Essentially, almost 11 cents of every dollar that side of the balance sheet is funding the Treasury deficits, rounded out for the agencies, which are also included in that number. Now, once you get below that fold, look at the banks outside of that large group that the H.8 report classifies and breaks out, it's only about 5.8%. So if you're an American, you're working with a regional bank or your local bank, odds are that those institutions are already by themselves not buying as much of the Treasury's debt issuance. What they're doing is the actual yeoman's work of lending into the real economy. So real estate loans, commercial loans, et cetera. It's about a 2-to-1 gap. So 5.8% of the assets on the balance sheet for a non-large commercial bank in the United States versus 10.9%. So you're already looking at about a 2x. So this doesn't fully resolve that problem. I would say expect for more bank regulation and supervisory just updates over the coming months, quarters, years as we continue to work our way through this big picture process. Like this offshore dollar and the public debt, all the monetary structure that led there, it's 70 to 80 years of entropy buildup. It's not going to be solved overnight. It's slow steps in progress, if you will, towards getting through this problem.
Right.
All right.
It's really interesting to me that it's such a wide disparity between GSIBs versus the regional banks, but it makes sense from a regulatory regime, right? It's easier to then say these top, 10 banks, 6 banks need to have this different different ratio in their holdings.
Yeah, and they're the safety valve. They're the largest balance sheets. They're the primary dealers. Whatever they can't distribute to their clients, now it's going to just
Stick on the
bottle up
balance
on
sheet.
their balance sheets and
Right.
then work its way out into credit creation in the U.S. economy. And once you have this compartmentalization layered on, and it's not a 0 to 1, it's a sequence of just building up. So that, all right, once we do this balance sheet expansion, does the inflation stay within the United States itself? Right, and that's
Right.
that's that's the end goal of this. Now, some other dogs not barking or kind of related headlines. So how do you kind of get your spidey sense that this is going on, or what else are we watching? So mid-October, this was an October 15th report. You got a report in the Fed's Notes series from the just army of PhD economists who work at the Fed and are writing research papers. You got a paper that came out that really highlighted the buildup of those dollar IOUs finding their way to fund the public debt, finding their way to the Caymans, right? They specifically singled this out, for a
I thought it was
reason.
really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, this is all about the onshore offshore dollar, or this would be a piece of evidence providing credence to that point where Fed policy is directly trying to address, and monetary policy, Treasury policy, et cetera. Um, this this defense buildup, if you will, to put the wall in between the onshore offshore dollar. So specifically targeting some charts in the paper. Figure one, they highlight the growth of hedge funds short positions in Treasury futures. So this would be on the CME Treasury futures contract, the short position. This is the basis trade everybody is talking about. You go long the Treasury bond themselves. So this would be your offshore bank um, funding or showing up to the Treasury auction to take down its share of the government's borrowing. They own the treasury bond outright. They hold the cash bond asset. What do? They turn around, they post it as collateral on the CME, and they short the futures and they engage in this just yield pickup, the spread, the basis trade, right? You can see the blowout here. Hedge fund short positions in treasury futures. It's well documented in the financial media. Um, it correlates to the growth in the treasury debt outstanding, but a greater and greater share of it is funded through the levered basis trades. Now, what this research paper pointed out and called attention to is a heavy share of this activity is coming out of the Cayman Islands. Hedge funds domiciled in that jurisdiction. And yeah, it's a strong argument to be made if you look at the breakout, Caymans in red, non-Caymans in blue. Uh, the Treasury securities themselves are being purchased by entities ultimately mapping to that Cayman Islands jurisdiction. And then the repurchase agreements, the short-term lending, or it could be the basis trade itself, where those treasuries are posted as collateral to fund another offsetting position, say repo markets or similar. That's also highly correlated with the Caymans. So the Fed themselves or the researchers, the papers they're making public are really pointing to the same conclusion about the offshore financing of the U.S. government budget. So really expresses the signal that you're looking for, that what you're seeing with the ESLR, what you're seeing with the other moves, the tariffs, et cetera. It's all about, where does the control of the dollar live? Is it onshore versus offshore? And the trend since, I'd say at least the turning point somewhere between the Yellen to Powell Fed transition over a decade ago at this point. Also the promotion of John Williams to the New York Fed. I'd say that's probably where we hit the turning point. And this trend is just continuing, right? So this is the battlefront that's emerging in the global capital wars, and we'll continue to watch it as the situation further develops. All
Yeah.
right, that takes us to the AI. Cameron, you want to go
Oh,
through here? We got a big announcement this week.
yep.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, so, first off, Genesis mission. For those of you who have not been paying attention, we already have been seeing headlines from the White House on funding different AI projects, data centers. If you don't remember, there was the big announcement with OpenAI previously. So, this is just a continuation of a thing that we're already seeing, but specifically, there's a lot of callbacks to, I know Matt, I'm going to flip us all the way back to our first slide here. A lot of callbacks to the moon mission, right? So
Mm,
I highly recommend people to take a look at the Genesis mission's website. You'll see a lot of it's a very slick web design, a lot of video that really again calls back to the moon landings, things like that. There's really a period where America was kind of front and center in the world's mind. So um, what does the Genesis mission do? Ultimately, it's really just the government opening up their claim is that it's going to open up all of the internal U.S. government documentation, research, etc., to then train AI models. And they very clearly outline this on the website here. How is the Genesis mission different from private sector AI? Unlike commercial models trained on the open internet, Genesis mission will draw from the government's secure, blah, 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 scientific data, right? So this is definitely a very big difference from what we've seen previously. If you think about how current models are trained, OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini as well, there is some level of private data that they're able to, or I should say proprietary data that they're able to train on. If you think about Google, they have all of that search engine information, right? Who searches for what, how it relates to search rankings. That's all information that sites like Anthropic, sites like OpenAI are unable to directly utilize. That's all open information, right? For the most part, it's publicly accessible. You could even try to, and people have tried to utilize Google search to then see what the rankings will look like to then try to train their own model to, approximate something like that. But this again is very different. This is saying there is a trove of government data that has not been publicly accessible
mm.
that will be then opened to these frontier labs. On the right here, I wanted to kind of it might be a little bit tough to read here. They haven't gone through the entire collaborator list to be clear, but what is available on the website, you're going to see some very common names: AMD, AWS, Anthropic. You've got Applied Materials. We talked about Cerebras chips on a previous episode, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, anybody and everybody already related to the data center trade, if they're somehow, U.S. based, have relations to the U.S. government already, MP Materials is on the list. They are part of this project.
So
Now,
I think
yeah,
something interesting here. This isn't just AI development companies, right? This goes beyond, what we've seen in the public sector headlines. OpenAI does deals with AMD, et cetera,
yep,
that we saw taking place over 2025. You've got the metals deals in here too. Remember when we saw the Department of Defense with MP Materials in June? This list is like you've got Albemarle, right? They're a lithium producer. You just go down here. Critical materials, recycling,
thyroid magnetics.
applied materials.
Yep.
Yeah, MP materials on this list. PMT, critical metals. This really kind of brings together holistically like what we've been focusing on covering in our weekly, topics. The metals element to this trade. I think what may be going on, the old world paradigm, the Keynesian approach, where hey, we just did public debt funding for any project, right? It's GDP enhancing, just do it. That's the model. It'll work. I think we're seeing what we're seeing take shape and play out here is a much more focused, public policy towards specific objectives, and it's really on this AI thing. But you're also getting, and part of that is you're getting the metals and resources, domestic security that you're seeing pop up, in discussion, not being reliant on a foreign party like China to own those critical supply chains. But I think in the bigger picture, what may be going on, If you just think about that old school Keynesian model, it's just like, yeah, just increase GDP, rinse, repeat. That's how you keep your economic growth humming along. We've kind of seen that model naturally play itself out, right? But I think what we're seeing the early stages, it's beyond the early stages. Like we're well on our way into that trend, in my opinion, is a focused national economic policy taking shape. And I think that like the term I'm seeing show up more and more is a focus on, in terms of the input, what matters to economic growth. It's not just the basics like throw capital at the problem, physical capital, throw labor, credit creation. Things happen. Productivity is the byproduct that you get as exhaust. And gradually, then suddenly, or whatever, that process works its way through over decades and centuries and leads to better outcomes. I think you're seeing a shift in thinking in policy in Washington, D.C. towards directing towards a specific goal. And that's what this AI situation, I think that's the kind of technology that's we've latched onto. It's captured the attention of everybody as the way out of this monetary, problem and debt situation that we found ourselves in after 70 years and that system reaching its end of life. But I think there's a new focus here on what's emerging. The term I'm seeing come up, I'll get to this. I'm kind of delayed the payload here, but energy density flux, right? And what does that mean? It's your economy's ability to produce energy, but not just broad broad spread everywhere. It's density. It's in specific places to meet specific goals, and then flux is the movement of that energy through time. I think that's really what we're getting with here. So all the key trends we've talked about, in addition to the geopolitics and the money on our weekly roundups every week, there's also that energy element driving at the core. And in the decades, centuries ahead, what it all boils down to is more energy density flux in the domestic U.S. economy, and that ultimately leads to productivity and higher quality of life for the average American household. We just had to cross this valley of death, if you will, that we're going through here, or that we've actually been going through for decades now. But yeah, I think it's fascinating what we saw, and maybe there is just this is just public marketing. We put a big um, just label on it to get the public excited. You call it Genesis project, same way with the Apollo programs. Let's get the space exploration going, all of that. So there's probably some of that in terms of just get the public rallying and behind something. Let's see if this captures the American imagination and gets people bought in, kind of like the excitement over the space program. That one's TBD, but there's definitely something very interesting already taking shape, and we're well underway on this process
And I did
here.
just want to add one interesting parallel just to bring up again from a prior episode. We did talk about China's AI development program. I had this in here, but this was actually from 2017. I highly recommend people taking a look at it. You don't need to read through the whole thing, it's extremely long. But effectively, in 2017, China put together their Genesis mission, right? All of these kind of things that we've been talking about here in the US, China has also been doing. Um, 2017 is when they timestamped this. The US has some documents similarly around 2017. So I don't want to make it try to seem like China is ahead of us per se on anything. But when we talk about kind of, Matt, you were talking through directing investment towards very specific end goals. You're seeing it very clearly on the US side with the Genesis mission. China has done that as well with they called it the new generation artificial intelligence development plan. So again, we're seeing kind of a similarity here in terms of how China is trying to direct their resources towards a specific end goal, AI in this case as well.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll continue to watch this week after week and try to isolate where something important should capture your attention. All right, let's get to the last thing. We're in the open window. We've got two open threads here. Last week we talked about the oil energy or global energy markets kind of in flux as the Treasuries, OFAC policy issuance or policy directive went out that they wanted to see Rosneft and Lukoil, the Russian oil majors, divest their oil assets in order for them to continue doing businesses on the domestic dollar financial system, which is becoming more and more important as the U.S. becomes that trusted third party man in the middle. That used to be the global offshore money center banks with the offshore dollar. Um, that one's up in the air. There's a couple of weeks left after everybody's back from the Thanksgiving holiday. This one's going down to the wire. It's joined at the hip with the Ukraine peace situation, right? The 28-point peace plan we've seen, floated in the reports. At this point, it's, back and forth over, line strikes, what's going to happen, what is a deal that both sides can sign. The way I view this, you've got a bid ask, you got Russia and Ukraine on two sides of the table. U.S. has shown up as the kind of the middleman, third party arbitration negotiator is kind of their role in this. And I think it's very clear the U.S. preference is for the EU countries, NATO itself, to uh, not be involved in this peace settlement process, which puts a natural kind of conflict between the EU because they clearly have a horse in this race as well, um, which is kind of why I think you're seeing pockets of, just call it disgruntledness, out of Europe, out of London, that are very obvious. They're not happy, one, about being left out, but also with the structure of the 28-point plan as it was presented about a week ago. So we'll see. I think we got, like last week we mentioned, we have that open window. There can be a piece that takes place, but does everybody want it to happen? I think at this point it's pretty clear Europe is not happy with the deal as presented on the table. No one's perfectly happy with the deal on the table, if you will, but this is the window for peace, and it really correlates to what's going on with on the global energy markets as well. And these things are at that point where it's either a zero or one. We either seize the moment, uh, take the win, and we come up with a kind of a negotiated settlement that can hold for hopefully years or a few decades, maybe. The whole underlying situation, though, is unresolved. It'll probably ultimately, just my opinion here, maybe this is too pessimistic, but there'll be more war in the future at some point. That's not a controversial claim. There's always a war. Civilizations are always fighting, but can we get to peace here for the short term or in our times? That's on the table here, but it's a zero or one. It may not happen just because some parties at the table or involved stakeholders don't want to see it happen. So big unknowns. We'll see that situation resolve one way or the other. Same as the Lukoil and Rosneft divestitures we talked about last week. But we're in that window. It's zero or one. This thing will go up either way, and that has implications for global financial markets. So everything you're seeing, stocks, bonds, et cetera, treasuries, dollar exchange rate, all of that. You got two big events here that need to come to a head in the next week or two. So we'll see how that plays out. We'll know more by the end of the year, and that'll really set the course for where we go into as far as the outlook for 2026.
And I think that's a perfect place to stop for today's episode. So thank you everybody for listening in on our post Thanksgiving episode. As always, feel free to like and subscribe to our YouTube on X. You can follow Matt at Levered USTs. Just a little note, I saw Matt, you were posting some good threads over the last couple of days. So again, audience highly recommend reading through what Matt's posting there as well. He's adding additional content, additional layers, kind of what he's discussing here as well with all of us each week.